Morning to all, afternoon to all. Well, it's not an afternoon yet, but by the time you see us and listen to us, it could well be afternoon. It might even be night time. But we're available all hours, 24/7, right, Pat?
Yeah,
Like the
absolutely.
Windmill Theatre, we never close.
And we keep
Uh,
on our clothes.
that's a that's a veiled reference to the informed people like ourselves who know what that means. Okay, Pat. You referred to an item that actually was in the news a week ago, but it's still a very interesting one about Alex Kane, a unionist commentator
Yeah,
statement.
Alex Kane was a former press officer for the UUP, but he's a columnist and he's for the Irish Times and I think the Irish News. He and Brian Finney cross swords every so often. But the one thing I like about Kane is actually a guy who seems to argue from a sort of center ground. When he talks, you're going to yourself, well, I can see the point there.
Mhm.
Like he's not, it doesn't seem to be based on bigotry. He's a unionist, confirmed unionist, etc., etc., etc. But he's a rational human being. But although I liked the article that he wrote, and he said that because I was thinking, I remember 1985 very well, and it was the Anglo-Irish Agreement in 1985. He says that was a major psychological blow to unionism, and it really was the first big one because it was at last, after what was it, 70 odd years or whatever it was, the Irish government were getting a say in the running of the North. Now,
Mm.
at that time, I remember reading the Anglo-Irish Agreement saying, Jesus, what's the big fuss about here? In fact, a lot of people, I think, had a reservation. But anyway, bottom line of it all was the South was given a say in regard to the running of the North, a consultative role. And
Mm.
I remember actually, I'll finish with this, but Seamus Mallon came down to the Derry Journal one day, and when I was editor there, and he came in and we got chatting about it. And I said, Seamus, with the greatest respect, am I supposed to be jumping up in the air and clapping for the Anglo-Irish Agreement? I said, I don't see very much on it. And he says, look, off the record, I agree with you. He says it's not massive or anything else, but he says here's the one thing it is, and he says it's like putting a nail in a bucket of water, near the top. He said a wee bit of water drops out at the start, and then a more drops out, and then more drops out, and he says that's what the Anglo-Irish Agreement is. He says it's it's the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning, whichever way you want to put it.
Mhm.
And I thought, and when you consider what sort of followed on from it, if I was a unionist, I would see it the same way as Alex Kane does.
Yeah, I think he's right. I think it was the first time. The thing that the unionists were very keen on was that this was a UK problem. And there were British
Yeah,
prime ministers who repeated that again and again. This was
yeah,
nobody's business but the UK, and the UK needed to sort this out. The Anglo-Irish Agreement made it clear that it wasn't simply that, as you say, that the Irish government had a role to play. Now, a lot of people I know were very sort of annoyed with the Anglo-Irish Agreement because effectively it was the South acknowledging the existence of the North. Uh, but on the other hand, as you say, they were given a consultative role, which, in a way, it's kind of uh, humiliating, and in another way, it's marvelous.
yeah.
Humiliating in that they can stand there and say what they want to say, but nobody's necessarily going to listen to them. They're not equal partners by any means. How things have changed.
Uh,
Seamus Mallon knew what he was talking about when he said there was a hole in the bucket. It's no
yeah.
longer that the South has a consultative role. It's no longer that nationalists or Republicans have, some sort of minor role and make concessions in the
Mm.
North. They're the biggest party, and Sinn Féin's the biggest party in Ireland. And Americans have a great interest, as we saw during the peace process, in the whole business. And unionists were glad to have him.
Yeah.
Senator George Mitchell, they were very glad to have that sort of sane voice keeping them together till they had something hammered out.
Jude, when you think about it, it was really, truly, it was more symbolic. It was sending a message to the unionists that maybe Westminster, their future just wasn't anymore just dependent on Westminster, that there were other factors at play. And Jude, that was the first time that was really sent, the message was sent to them.
Mm.
Even Perogue and Stormont, because it just simply moved to Westminster,
Yeah.
they were still under that remit of the British government. Suddenly now here was it was more than a political deal. It was symbolising. You said, "Hey, your future just might not be totally dependent on Westminster."
I'm just thinking about something I saw today there. Somebody was saying that they're making a case for nationalists and Republicans in the North having an observer role at the EU, because there's no such thing as a Northern MEP now, as there was
Yeah,
when we were part of the EU. But since that's the will of the people in the North,
yeah,
61% or something, it would make
yeah,
sense to allow delegates to go from the nationalist slash Republican community and be observers at
yeah,
big meetings in Brussels. What do you think of
yeah.
that, Pat? Is that a worthwhile thing, or is it?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the thing about it, the island of Ireland, Jude, let's get this clear. Uh, you know, the people in Northern Ireland in the North didn't vote to leave the EU, and in fact, what do you call it, under the what is the Windsor Framework Agreement, basically, Northern Ireland is still within the EU in many respects.
Hmm.
So I think at the very least, there should be some sort of representation, maybe not voting rights, but the right to sort of make contributions or to debates and discussions.
Well, there's an interesting thing now, was the case before Brexit, and that was that the people in the North and all of Ireland were EU citizens.
Hmm.
Now, I would say there's a lot of people, I would consider myself one of them. I would say I'm still an EU citizen. The
Yeah,
thing about being an EU citizen, however, is you're entitled to have representation, which is something
yeah,
we don't have.
yeah,
Now, the observer status, again, it's like the Anglo-Irish agreement. It's not much, but it's something. By rights, if
yeah,
they're saying we are and genuinely EU citizens, there's no point in being a citizen if you don't have somebody representing you at the power-making body.
yeah, yeah. But
So,
see that, but the complexity is, Jude, Northern Ireland is under UK rule, and that's a reality.
hmm.
And it's like a hybrid.
Well, then
It's
they should
neither one
say,
nor the
Pat, they
other.
should they should say that we're not. Well, you're okay. You're on the right side of the border, but for
Yeah,
poor buggers like me, they should say you're not an EU citizen.
yeah. Well, that's true too. The only thing is under the Windsor Framework Agreement. Basically, Northern Ireland's half in and half out. It's the only part of these islands that where it applies. And Jude,
Uh,
that's the ridiculousness of partition of an island. And it
Isn't it
really is.
crazy?
I remember Hume one time, Jude, and he didn't make a big fuss of it. Remember, I think it was during one of those scares, emergencies, foot and mouth or something.
Hmm.
And he says, Paisley came to him behind the scenes. He says, "Hey, John, basically what Paisley wanted for the farmers was the same deal the Republic was getting, and so on. So Paisley was more than anxious to work with him, wanted, and to see the same deal as the Republic, but he wasn't willing to deal with them publicly because yeah.
Uh,
So
Upset the backwoods man.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I suppose a little. We shouldn't make what does they say now? Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Is that what they say?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if I haven't got perfection, maybe just the good will do. Okay, let's move to another topic, Pat. One I must say has been a long time coming, and it happened to a very, very, very rich Irishman by the name of Dennis O'Brien. Are you aware of
Brian,
what
yeah, yeah.
happened to Dennis O'Brien? He
Yeah,
was,
Dennis O'Brien and his spokesman James Morrissey had to pay. Well, it's nearly 500,000 each, isn't it? Something along that. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
The background is, of course, that O'Brien at the time was being Mister. I don't know. Was it? What was it? The
He owned the Sunday Independent, the Irish
Yeah, but
Independent.
there was
He
something to
owned
do
about
with
he owned about
phones.
five, seven radio stations. He had more influence. He was Ireland's Rupert Murdoch. Was on steroids.
Aye, but he had also a thing whereby he got the license for, I don't know, the
The
internet, the phones or
telecommunications license
something.
for yeah,
Aircom, I think it was. And
yeah,
any number of people bought into it, including some Fianna Fáil people. And in the end, they worked out being stung because a lot of money was lost in that. But anyway, Dennis
yeah.
O'Brien is rolling in it. He doesn't live here in Ireland. He lives somewhere like Switzerland or I don't know where it is.
I think
Wherever
he
is
lives in
good.
Portugal, Jude. I'm not certain, but
Portugal,
I think it's
aye,
Portugal.
wherever's good for
Yeah,
his bank balance, I guess. But he said something that's been said again and again. Sinn Féin, maybe with others, but certainly with Sinn Féin, they commissioned an investigation as to whether it was right the way the media was being controlled in Ireland.
Yeah,
And at the
yeah,
back of their mind was the Indo, which at that time was owned by Dennis O'Brien and which was violently anti-Sinn Féin. And after the report came in and it said, yes, that was, there was far too much centralising of the
yeah,
ownership of the media in Ireland. And O'Brien said that the jury, that the Sinn Féin had got, the Sinn Féin IRA had got the result that they had asked for or what they'd bought. And that Sinn Féin IRA certainly got the report they paid for, which
yeah.
really, you would say in one way that's a very ordinary sort of statement because the number of unionists that say Sinn Féin IRA goes on forever. But the two guys who were responsible for the report, two lawyers, they said, "You're putting our lives in danger. You're saying we're in favour of the IRA, and we're not in favour of the IRA." And by God, they won it, which must have been really sickening because Dennis O'Brien was in the court all through the hearings, and he was
Yeah.
there for the verdict as well. So you could say that maybe manners has been put on.
Jude,
Dennis O'Brien.
you know, now someone. I always revert to the Martin McGuinness one about 30 years ago when I said Sunday Independent put in something absolutely scurrilous about him,
Mm,
which he
mm.
had nothing to do with. And I remember at the time saying to Martin, "Why didn't you sue him?" And he says, "Pat, grow up. What's my chances of getting a fair trial in Dublin against the Sunday Independent?" No, Jude, that's changed. Remember Jerry Adams and Mary Lou McDonald and got damages quite recently
Oh
and all
yeah,
the rest
yeah.
of it. And some guys in Fianna Fáil said, Sinn Féin are resorting to the courts now and all the rest of it. And I remember Mary Lou McDonald came out and says, very simple, stop labeling us and we won't go to court. And should I agree with that? Because
I
if
absolutely agree with it.
some of the things have been said, right? Dara Mackin and I think it's Gavin Booth were the names of the two solicitors. They're Belfast based.
Yeah.
They said it's all very well to make political comment, but these guys are professionals. They represent one day maybe Jude Collins, maybe the next day Pat McGarrett, maybe somebody in Sinn Féin one day, and maybe somebody in the DUP the next day.
Yeah.
This is their legal profession,
Mhm.
and they're saying this when there's real life consequences. Solicitors and journalists and people in the north have been shot and their lives threatened. Pat Finucane was killed. I can't remember the young fellow from the Sunday World who was shot dead several years ago.
Yeah.
So they're saying that, when you deliberately put out Sinn Féin and the IRA got the report they deserved. When these guys say, "Look, we had a look and from a professional, neutral perspective at the media ownership in Ireland, and here's what we found," Jude, I would say they were 100% right because there was an unbelievable concentration of media power in Dennis O'Brien's hands. It's a
Hmm.
fact. I don't understand why anybody would sort of try and smear two lawyers by saying when they only stated the obvious.
Well, I suppose, well, they brought this report in, which made it sort of um, formal, whereas informally they were saying there was too much power in O'Brien's hands. But yeah, how did the DUP get away with, and many other unionists get away with for so long with saying Sinn Féin slash IRA? How
But
come they weren't?
Jude, that was during that era. I would say there's a growing moving away from that now.
Aye, you
I
don't
think
hear
you could
much of it
you could
now.
find yourself in court. At one stage, you could throw anything at a Republican, and everybody knew. Hey, the old one about the definition of libel is anything that will lowers the standing of a person in the eyes of an
Mm.
ordinary person.
Hmm.
During the Troubles, a Republican been accused of being a Republican been accused of being in the IRA. Most people say, "What's your, isn't he?" And a court would the chances of getting a court to find in your favor if you're a Republican were
Mm.
no.
Yeah, fairly nil. Okay, let's go on to another case which involved killings. I find this particularly interesting. It's taken by, I've forgotten his first name now, one of the Reeveys. Is it Eugene Reevey?
I think it's
Who
usually
is
I.
one of the Reevey brothers. Now, in 1975, I think it was. No,
Yeah,
1976. The John Martin Reevey, Brian Reevey, and a third brother were shot, Anthony, were shot in their homes. Two
Yeah.
of the brothers died then. The third one, Anthony, died several weeks later. They were 22, 24, and 17 years of age. Now, I find that very interesting. I'm sure so does Eugene Reavey. He says that he was told again and again that what happened there, that he would get hearings for a December trial date, not to be moved. He said he's been trying to do this for decades, and he was assured definitely this time there will be a trial date established in December. He says now 10 days out from that, I'm told the PSNI and the MOD are not ready. He says it feels like the air was pulled out of my agencies. He says this isn't a question of resources or scheduling. The defence have had ample time to prepare for their hearing and consistently ignored court orders. So here's a man whose three brothers were shot dead in their own home, and he's trying to get the truth of what occurred. He's never
Uh,
going to bring back his brothers, but he's trying to get the truth of what happened, and he's simply been fobbed off. Why would that be, Pat? Briefly, 10 words or less. Why would that be?
I don't know. I haven't. I read it that quite recently. The big problem. I presume there's all sorts of nefarious activities by various British agents.
If I say
I
Glenanne
presume.
gang, does that give you a hint?
Glenanne gang. That's what I'm getting at too. Yeah. Here's the thing, Jude. Just a quick. Ian Paisley went into Parliament and with parliamentary privilege said Eugene Reavey was the IRA commander for the area and so on. And a policeman, I can't remember his name, John Boucher, I think it was, recently said that is the biggest. There was never ever any suspicion about Eugene Reavey or whatever. And Paisley said that what he called it, that he was the night of the shootings that he was out directing traffic. What Reavey said was that the night of the shootings, he didn't realize what was going on, and he thought cattle or someone got out of the field, and there were cars backing up, and he was directing them out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, Paisley never ever apologized for it. And by the way, the other thing as well, apparently, the man who whispered in Paisley's ear about Reavey was Wooly Fraser. Wooly, who was up to his eyeball, Wooly, the peacemaker, and all the rest, who was a member of a gun gang all his life, and I find it amazing that the RUC never copped on to that Wooly was up to his eyeballs.
Now,
Wooly, remember the guns that came in for South Africa?
yeah,
Africa. It was only after Wooly died it was suddenly discovered Wooly was the guy who had stored them and had distributed them.
yeah. Now, there's a little bit of context here, and it's kind of, in one way, it's understandable. In another way, it's sort of awful. This shooting of the three Reavey brothers occurred on the 4th of January 1976. On the 5th of January 1976, we had the Kingsmill massacre.
Yeah,
So why do you think we had that massacre of 10 Protestant, I think it was 10 Protestant workmen on their way back from work one day?
yeah.
Why do you think that happened? Do you think,
There
is it
was
that the
definitely
IRA were essentially a sectarian band that were out to shoot as many
no, someone
Protestants
should.
as they
I
could?
remember. I remember at the time chatting to a Republican, and whether you agree with him or disagree with him is irrelevant. He said that at the time the thinking was, "Hey, we got to start killing these because they're just killing everybody." There's got to be a price to pay for this. Most of the sectarian killings then were being done without question by loyalists.
Mm.
Now I know. I remember the time talking to a couple of other Republicans. They were totally opposed to it. They said that they were it was making the Republican movement and their fight for freedom and as they saw it, anti-sectarianism. But I remember, I remember asking somebody. Now I don't think it was McGuinness. Why did they do it? And they said it was basically saying, "Look, you've got to stop this."
Mm. And they did, and it
Yeah,
did actually. There was a very sharp falling off in the attacks on ordinary Catholics.
Catholics after
Um,
that. Yeah.
so, and there's a brutal kind of logic to it. The only thing that makes me
Yeah.
pause is there was 10 Protestant workmen killed, and there was three Reavey brothers killed. Uh, Disproportionate. And I tend to be, I mean, it's not a fair comparison, but I tend to think of Gaza and I tend to think of October the 7th. What happened on October the 7th was awful, but their reaction was totally, I mean, 70,000 for 1,200. And I suppose you could argue 10 Protestant workmen for three Catholic brothers.
Yeah.
It's,
And the other thing about it, these the 10% were totally innocent people. They
mm,
like they'd
mm,
done nothing wrong. So it's just a horrible situation. But what happened to Reeves was, beyond horrific. Three
Ah,
brothers one night. Imagine what that did to their parents and to Eugene
ah.
Reevy and all the rest.
I
Totally
always think it's
innocent people.
terrible.
But the whole point of Jude was to terrorize. That was the point.
That's right. That's right. They put the fear of God into people. Okay, let's move to more recent events. And we have a prominent priest, it says in the I don't know what it's Irish news, maybe, accuses BBC Northern Ireland of unconscious bias against the Catholic faith. Father Tim Bartlett has called for an independent review of the broadcaster, particularly its operation in the north. Do you think, Pat, that the BBC in the north has an unconscious bias against the Catholic faith?
Well, the BBC, Jude, let's be clear. There's always, I've always got that impression. That, it's like the Church of England, the BBC, the Queen and all this sort of stuff. And I think I know that when the priest comes on, it's like it's sort of oh, there's the wee Irish rebel, type thing. Now that might be unfair, but I think there is an unconscious bias there. That
Against Catholic
it's
Church?
basically. I guess the Catholic Church. I think they are more at home with clergymen and reverends and vicars than Father O'Donnell or whatever his name might be.
Uh,
There's just that something, Jude. There's the
how does
Queen, the
it show
defender of the
itself,
faith.
Pat? How does it show itself?
No, it's quite hard to explain, Jude. You just get the impression, and I've always had that impression, by the way, that the wee Catholic priest is there in sufferance because but they're really at home with the Archbishop of Canterbury and whatever, that sort of thing.
I actually know exactly what you mean. I remember a time when there was a guy who was a big man in running uh, um, a 5 mile run on Boxing Day in Greencastle in County Tyrone. I've forgotten his
Yeah,
name now, but he was a marvelous guy. But I know that he went up to Stormont, and I went with him, and he was with several MLAs, Republican MLAs, trying to persuade the government of the time to invest in this Greencastle event, which attracted thousands. I mean, it was
yeah,
unbelievable. And it was a really awful course. They used to have, the fourth bit of it was on a terrible hill. I used
yeah,
to be able to run then, and they used to have a little slogan saying, "It's only a hill, get over it,"
yeah,
which I thought was clever. But anyway, he went up to Stormont, and I remember when we were coming away from it, he said, "Oh, they should pull that bloody place down." He had what he was talking about was a sort of atmosphere in
yeah,
Stormont at the time. It really has the stench of unionism or the scent, if you want to call it that. It
yeah,
cries out, "We are the masters." And there's
yeah,
nothing really. You'll search high and low about Stormont before you come on too many windows or plaques or statues to half the population. That is to say, to Republicans or nationalists over the years or decades or centuries. So he thought that was an aspect of the BBC. I was in and out of the BBC a lot for a time until they threw me out. I
yeah.
I think it's probably true that it wasn't an unconscious bias, and it wasn't a bias so much as an sort of by osmosis. People knew what
Yeah.
people to interview and what people not to interview, what line to take with certain people and what line not to take with certain people. And if you
Yeah.
broke those rules, they were never written down. But if you broke those rules, you'd find yourself out in your arse. And I found
Yeah.
myself out in my arse. However, I am not
Mm.
sure that you can still say that they are an anti-Catholic bias. I know
No,
Tim
I don't know
Bartlett
if it's
and
anti-Catholic bias, dude. It's as you, to use your term, it's almost osmosis. There's this sort of Protestant ethos, or establishment ethos, and the Catholic Church is not really part of that ethos.
well, I suppose that's true. They weren't part of the building up of it. The Catholic Church, along with the rest of us, was on the outside in the 50 years that after the state was established. Um, do you think? Hey, do you remember, Pat? Do you remember the time that there used to be a slot for? Maybe this was RTE. I'm thinking of that they had a slot for end of the day, where very
Yeah,
often
yeah,
a clergyman or sometimes and I remember Gus what was his name now? Gus Martin. He taught in
Yeah,
UCD. I remember him being on, and the other people like, oh, I don't know, some of the fiction writers of the day.
uh,
And they would talk on some aspect of life which had a direct spiritual
uh,
line, or just talking about the wonder of life and the magic of life or something like that.
yeah.
Is that a loss? That's been stopped for decades now. Should that be
Did you know?
reinstated?
I think to a certain extent. Did you know years ago I used to think in RT that the Angelus. At one
Yeah.
stage I was totally in favor of them dropping it. No,
Hmm.
I'm not. You can be a Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, whatever. Somebody taking 1 minute as what's how long does it take for the Angelus at 6 o'clock? 1 minute. Just stop for 1 minute and contemplate or meditate or whatever, or say a prayer, no, irrespective of your religion. I actually think it's actually a very nice thing now. Maybe I've mellowed or some bloody thing. I'm not sure, but I'm all in favor of it now.
I
And at one stage, about 20 or 30 years ago, it said like, we're now a secular state. Why are we still doing this?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Pat. I think the angels is a nice thing. I like the bells ringing the way they ring, very solemnly and
Yeah,
emphatically, and it does stop you in your tracks, and you don't. It gives your head time to settle. But I still think I would like to see that end of the day thing reinstated. Thought for the day. We used to have thought for the day on
yeah,
BBC Radio Ulster. I kind of
yeah,
liked it. Some of it was crap, but some of it was good. And certainly the ones on RTE at the end of the day on TV, I really liked those. It sort
yeah,
of give you a different slant on the world you're living in, whereas all the other things are political events and natural
yeah,
disasters and so on. Now, just mixing in with that is the fact this report from the Supreme Court in England
yeah,
saying that the way religion is taught in Catholic schools and Protestant schools, I guess, certainly Catholic schools here, is wrong, that it's sort of brainwashing and it shouldn't happen. Could you clarify what they said, Pat, or am I?
Oh, Jude, I read it and I haven't a bloody clue what it means. Like they're saying it's indoctrination or some bloody thing. I was going to ask you, well, what exactly is what's the case being made here?
Well,
I read it. I am no further forward than and when I'm finished when I started.
I think they're saying that all religions should be dealt with or looked at in schools, which I actually totally approve of. And
Yeah,
then, if you want to teach kids about the Catholic faith or the Protestant faith or the Hindu faith or anything else, religion, fire ahead, which seems actually reasonable enough to me. One of the things that people say is about integrated education, for example, that
yeah,
they essentially say we teach all religions in this school,
yeah,
and let the children pick their own to live by. I think that's nuts. I really think that's
yeah,
nuts because if I'm coming from a Catholic home and I've been taught all my days by my mother and father that there's a God and Catholicism has
yeah,
certain rules and you're supposed to abide by them. And at the age of 11, bang, I go into this environment where it doesn't matter a damn, really. You just take your pick. It's like Dolly Mixtures. Take any one of these, or
yeah,
none if you want to. Uh, that would cause, I think, a disruption in my head. So I think it's
yeah,
naive to say leave it until the child becomes an adolescent and let them choose themselves. I think that's a bit
yeah,
daft, actually. I think young people
yeah,
they need a constancy in whatever it is, whatever faith or no faith that they have. That has to be constant. No point in saying it works while they're at home and then they go to school and it's all gone.
Jude, I wrote, by the way, I wrote it down, and I'll read the sentence because it still doesn't make any sense to me. The Supreme Court, this is from, by the way, Dara Mackin, the guy who had the problem with Dennis O'Brien, but he's from Phoenix Law, the film or the firm Phoenix Law.
Yeah.
He said, the Supreme Court has confirmed that all children are entitled to an education that respects their freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. The judgment makes clear that the state cannot rely on withdrawal mechanisms to justify religious instruction. That is about as clear as mud.
Well, what I picked up was there was a great kerfuffle at first because it seemed to be banning the teaching of religion in schools.
And
They
apparently it's
then
not.
explained further, and they said, no, where you can certainly, all we're saying is give equal space to all religions or none. And then
Yeah.
after you've done that, you can go ahead and teach whatever line you
So
want in
yeah,
terms
I
of.
think they're sort of saying all children should be entitled to freedom of thought, conscience, and all the rest of it, and you cannot indoctrinate people. But how does that work in the classroom?
It's hard to know. You see, where's the line between indoctrination and teaching kids
Aye,
at this?
and teaching.
Like, you may as
Aye,
well say that I have brought up my kids. I've indoctrinated them against murdering people.
yeah,
No, that's
exactly.
not that's not really the term I'd want to use. I think I'd want to
uh,
think that I'd done something different. Um, I think, you know what I think, Pat? One of the things that Padre Tabine said, and I heartily agree with him. Most Catholics in Ireland now, the South and the North, but especially in the South, would be embarrassed to admit that they'd been to Mass last Sunday.
uh,
Isn't that true?
there's an element of truth in that.
Because I
In
think that
fact,
people
and
interpret
the
it as
chat and
meaning that you're. Yeah, go ahead.
amongst
Sorry.
the chattering classes, Jude, being seen to go to, the intellectual classes, being seen to go to masses, you're sort of almost some sort of, one of these people who believe in superstition and myth.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right. And you're caught up with the old ways, or you may even be a sympathizer of sexual abuse of minors. You know,
Exactly. So,
that's the
hey,
sort
Jim,
of.
here before, can I, there's a couple of things. Just I'm reading on the Irish Times on Saturday. Was it no Sunday? A fellow called Ed Abrahamson.
Oh
He's a
yes.
pediatrician, and this article he said Ireland's position in regard to Israel is sort of off the scale, etc., etc., etc. And he says basically that in fact, it's got so bad that the one country in the world that Israel had to close their embassy in was Dublin, and etc., etc., etc. Did you read the article?
Oh, I did. I did. I did. He said the left, followed closely by the centre, has pursued what has now become the predominant establishment position, one that is pro-Palestine and hostile to Israel. This is reflected in academia, unions, and the media. The answer to that I would give is, and thank God for that. I mean,
Uh,
he says essentially, and actually he even says that they had no choice. It's ignoring, he says, Israel's decision to go to war after October the 7th. They're saying that they had a choice. He says they didn't have any choice. Sorry, I don't agree with that. They had a right to defend themselves, but they didn't have a right to go in and slaughter and destroy
oh,
every
so
city in
do
Gaza.
you ever notice about all these people who are Israeli apologists totally, completely downplay Israel's role, and it's always the other guy's fault. It is never Israel's fault. And your man's article, you know, Israel, to repeat, has killed at least 70,000 people. At least there's 170,000 injured. They what do you call it? They bombed hospitals, refugee centers, all the rest of it. This guy sort of saying, "Look, we had to do this." They did not, Jude. It was
That's
totally,
ridiculous.
completely, and utterly disproportionate. And see the way he downplays it. And then people condemning this are anti-Semitic. You know, absolute load of bollocks.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, just moving on because I know we're down to three. What do you make
I
of Marjorie Taylor Greene?
oh, you mean
At
Marjorie
one stage,
Traitor Green?
at one stage, the ultimate trumper, absolute, and now she's withdrawing from Congress. What do you
Well,
make?
what I found even interesting, even more interesting along the same lines, was the meeting of MAHOOD MAMDANI and Donald
Yeah,
Trump in the Oval Office. What did you think
it's like
of?
a love fest.
What did you think of the performance of? That's the first time I've seen a sustained MAHOOD MAMDANI, sort of interview or appearance. What do you think of him?
I think he's a man of serious talent, Jude.
Oh,
By the time he left, he had Trump eating out of his hands, etc., etc., etc. And this is the guy that Trump was referring to as a commie the week before, etc. And by the way, Mandami didn't deviate from his principles one iota,
no, no.
But he charmed Trump. Trump is a moron. Flatter him and you get anything.
That's right. You know, one of the greatest tragedies in American politics at present is that Mamdani was born in, what was it, Uganda or somewhere like that,
I
and
think it's
thus
Uganda,
cannot
yeah.
run for president. He would be, as he stands, he would be an outstanding representative for the Democrats.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not going to happen. But he'll do a job in New York anyway.
Well,
Okay, Pat,
Jude,
that's all
as
I've
we
time
speak,
for. Except you want to
is that
say
it?
something else? Did you want to give us a blessing?
I No, I just the Americans have given the Russians a wish list in Ukraine. That's
Oh. Yeah.
Unbelievable. Trump has
Well,
just basically said whatever Putin wants in Ukraine, he can have
yeah.
it.
Oh, well, we'll sort that the next week,
Unbelievable.
Pat. Okay. All the best.
Okay, Jude.
Thanks a
All the
lot.
best, Jude. Good luck.
Yeah. Huh. We left it
That
very
was quick.
fine. Too fine, too
But
tight.
sure, we got plenty of topics.
See, I know we're not going to have time for this. Remember you said that the bit, there was a 3 minute hole in one of the recordings where
Aye.
I'd gone off. I thought I'd put the thing on pause and then when I come back, it went straight into it. No? Did you,
No, I
did
didn't
you,
know.
did you